Hello and welcome to the Universal Observations channel. Today, in capturing the North America Nebula, or NGC 7000, I'm going to take a few extra steps and show you how I use Stellarium to choose a target that I'm going to image. I'm also going to show you taking a filter hack back, something I'm going to pull back something I did before in the pinwheel video that I did, and I'm going to show you a little bit about how I use Gimp to do some processing. So stay tuned, watch the video, and let us know your thoughts. Comment below, subscribe if you'd like to, and please watch on. I thought before we do the imaging session, I'd show you a little bit of my workflow and how I figure out which targets I'm going to shoot and what's going to be where. If you haven't found the program Stellarium, I highly recommend that you take a look at it, download it. It's a free program. I just big thanks to the people that work on this, and just thanks for doing it. Thanks for taking the time. What it is it will show you, and you can move around here with the mouse. So I'm holding down my left mouse button and moving that around. I can turn on and off the ground view if you want and kind of see through that. I can turn on different constellations, the constellation labels. I tend to show the equatorial grid, and then I also look for deep sky objects. Now, as I'm recording this, it's a few days after I've actually done my imaging session, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of roll back to the time and date when I was going to image, and you can do that here with the kind of the fast forward, and if you keep clicking, it goes back faster and faster and faster, or you can click on this button. It'll take you right to the current time and date. Now, another way that you can select a time and date, and what I'm going to do is come over here to the this little flyout window over here on the left-hand side, is go to a particular date time. And when I imaged, it was actually August the 1st, 2019, and I did this starting about 8:39 p.m. or so. So here, let's just set this for roughly 9 p.m. local time, and we'll close this window. So I can see now where things were going to be roughly in the sky. You know what? I didn't, let's see, was there something I didn't turn on? Nope, this is about how I like to do it. I guess we got to kind of wait for it to get a little darker. So I'll fast forward this to get kind of a little bit in the night sky. There we go. So now, as you can see, I'm viewing south in this view, and there's kind of roughly the Milky Way kind of cuts through here, and there's a handful of things in there. And if we scroll the mouse wheel, and there's a few other ways to do that, you can zoom in. You can see down here in the bottom there's the field of view. What I like to do is kind of, before I am going to image, I tend to pick what is the weather going to be. So I look out a few days in advance and see what the weather is going to be, make sure there's clear skies. There's a few different tools to be able to do that. And then I look to find a target that I want that's applicable to the scope that I have, which is the William Optics Zenithstar 61, and what that's kind of capable of doing. And right now I'm finding that if I rotate this around, and depending on the field of view that I have from my yard, my imaging site, I can get a little bit kind of right up here in this northeast kind of quadrant, and roughly, because I have a lot of light pollution off to the west of me and a little bit to the northeast, once things get up in kind of this area, about horizontal with Polaris, by the way, this is North Star here, Polaris, once they get up about here is where the light pollution kind of tapers off, and then I can expect that to kind of rotate up almost overhead, and expect that to be what I can image. And as you can see down here, Andromeda is really low on the horizon, fairly early in the evening. That's going to be rotating up here in the next few weeks, few months, and I'll probably do another session with that up and coming. But one of the things that I found, and if I zoom in, so my scope, that William Optics scope, the Zenithstar 61 has roughly a 4 or 5 degree field of view. So in playing around and just kind of scrolling across the night sky, I found that if I'm at about 4 or 5 degrees of field of view, the North America Nebula looks kind of nice and kind of what I can image, given the scope that I have, the focal length, which is 360 millimeters, and I use a full frame camera, so there's no crop magnification in there. So I thought, this would be a good target to go after. And if you click on this in Stellarium, you can get. Oops, let me click on it right here and see if I can do that. So that then shows you a little bit more about it. North America Nebula. It's often mispronounced or misread as North American. It's actually North America Nebula, also known as NGC 7000. And as I understand it, if I could rotate this maybe 90 degrees in North America, this might be Florida here. This might be the Gulf of Mexico, down into Mexico and the Yucatan Peninsula, kind of down in here, kind of the west coast of North America here. And on up into Canada, and as I understand it, this is the Pelican Nebula up here as well. Unfortunately, I didn't know exactly what I was going to be doing, and I couldn't get a lot of pre-images, and I really didn't understand my framing. So I went over here and kind of took a look at this star, which happens to be, I looked it up right before I recorded this, Epsilon Cygnus or Cygni. Epsilon Cygni, and I was kind of going off of this star to kind of get things in my frame, and it turns out when I did that, I kind of got it up in my frame, and I got a little bit cut off of the North American Nebula. Well, I guess you live and learn, and next time I'll get a little bit better and maybe frame this up so I can get the Pelican Nebula in there, and I think the field of view will support that. So you can see if I'm out around 4 degrees, I should be able to get that in there. Next session, I'll kind of frame that up. But you can see how Stellarium makes this really easy to figure out what you're going to be able to target. And if you wanted to, you could scroll ahead in time here. You can see this is approaching 10 p.m. local time. And if I scroll out and watch this thing as the evening goes on into the later night. You can also see some satellites kind of floating by here. But if I zoom back out, I can watch this. Where is this going to be, let's say at 1 a.m. in the morning? And that is quite overhead. That's almost straight up. And any further over to the west, and it starts to get into trees for me. So I use Stellarium a lot to kind of understand where things are going to be and what I can image, and how late I'm going to stay up into the night as I'm doing this. Okay, so on to the imaging session. Before we do the imaging, one quick detour about the filter hack takeback. Okay, so one of the things before I go out tonight I wanted to talk about, well, first of all, here at Universal Observations, I try to make sure that I'm teaching or explaining things that maybe you couldn't find online or have questions about. And what I thought I did was pretty kind of a pretty neat hack. Well, I started out, I bought this, hopefully you can see this, hopefully it's in focus, this SV Boni CLS filter, and because I've got a lot of light pollution here, and unfortunately there weren't enough threads to thread this on to the Adjustable Flat 61 for my William Optics Zenithstar 61, and so when I got it, I tried to thread it on here, and there's just not enough threads. So I thought I did a really neat hack, and I bought this this other filter, just kind of the cheapest one I could find on Amazon, and I unscrewed this compression ring and switched the glass. I put the glass from the SV Boni CLS filter into this filter with this compression ring, so there'd be enough threads, and I could put this on here, screw this on, and then put my T-ring adapter on here for my camera. And I had a couple of viewers comment on the channel, on the actually on the Pinwheel Galaxy video that I did, saying, hey, that's not really safe, you should do it the other way. And I said, what's the other way? And they said, well, you should mount it inside of the flattener. Well, when I bought this scope, the Adjustable Flat61 was brand new, and on the William Optics site, they didn't yet have the documentation or the pictures that you could mount a filter in here. So now what I'm going to do before tonight's imaging session, actually what I've done already is I've switched the filter glass back into the actual SV Bony CLS holder here, and I took this filter off of here, and what I'm going to do for tonight's session is I'm going to open up the Adjustable Flat61, which it now shows on the William Optics website how to do, and when you open this up, you'll find that there's actually inside threads in here. So instead of mounting this on the outside here, what you do is you flip it over, and you can mount it on the inside of the Adjustable Flat61, and then put this piece back on. Now you need to pay attention to the mounting depth here. It shows on the William Optics site that you need 12.9, so we'll get this up here and put that right at about 12.9, and then lock it down, and then before tonight's imaging session, I'll be able to then put the T-ring adapter right here, and then the weight of the camera won't actually be on just those couple little threads here, and have the risk of falling off, dropping on the ground, possibly the cement, depending on where I'm imaging from. So I thought I had done a really slick thing, kind of a nice hack, and purchasing the SV Bony CLS filter, which is a pretty reasonable price compared to some others, and then buying this very cheap other filter just to switch the glass in. And I thought, I've kind of done a neat hack to be able to do this very cost effectively. And again, as people have pointed out, that might not be a safe thing. So I've now put that on the inside, and maybe I've given some other people some ideas, and hopefully saved their expensive camera equipment. So on to the imaging session. Well, as I do before any imaging session, I always check the weather. It was going to be clear, so I set up my Zenithstar 61, the guide scope, the Ioptron SkyGuider Pro, my tripod, my laptop, got everything cabled up, and then looked at the sky, and there's this haze, and then I remembered there's some Canadian fires going on, and the smoke is drifting over into my area. I turned to the northeast, and still hazy. It should be bright blue at this point, and I'm not quite sure what this is going to end up doing to the final image, but we will have to see. All right, so we've done our imaging. We've taken our flat files, our dark files, our bias files, our light files, put those through Deep Sky Stacker, and gotten this image out of it. This is the autosave.tiff. I try not to do any image processing in Deep Sky Stacker. I tend to use Gimp as opposed to Photoshop or Lightroom or anything like that. I just happen to have used it for a long time and more familiar with the controls. Although I'm getting better, I'm not great at some of the imaging processing. Here you can see there's not much visible of the North America Nebula in this image. And so one of the things that I like to do first, you can see that this image is absolutely huge. If I was getting some high level images that I wanted to print or sell or something instead of just show a handful of folks, I would probably keep this resolution. Deep Sky Stacker outputted this as a resolution of almost 11,000 by 7,300. So very huge image. So one of the first things that I'm going to do is scale this down. So I'm going to come in here and go image, scale image, and just for what I'm working with today and kind of doing a workflow, I'm going to maybe set this at a 4K resolution, so 3840. And if you keep the little link clicked here, which it is, when you hit enter or tab, it will auto keep the same aspect ratio. So if I do that, there's 3840 by 2564. So maybe I want to go a little bit lower than that. Let's just pick 1920 by 1080, and or 1920. I guess it's not that aspect ratio. And then here, just to keep some resolution, I'm going to keep 300, pretty high resolution there, and scale that. And this might take a couple of seconds, not too bad. And then you can see here, if I go back into view, zoom, and then fit image to window, now it's a much more manageable size, and things will happen much faster this way. Then really the stretching of this, there's a few tools that you can purchase, PixInsight and a few others that are pretty high dollar amount, but also probably much better for doing this. But the way I found to do this, at least get some reasonable results, is come in here to colors, levels, and now one of the things that many of you GIMP users may not realize is you can actually stretch this window out, and then it gives you a little bit better view of your histogram here. And what this does is I'm going to take the little triangle slider here and slide the dark set point here to the edge, or almost to the edge, maybe not quite, but just make sure that I'm not clipping off any useful values out of that little histogram here. And then I'm going to slide this gray point, this midpoint, not quite all the way, but maybe about halfway to where it was, between where it was and the edge of my histogram, right edge of my histogram. And now you can see some of the image start to appear there. Now what I don't know and haven't really played with is it better to do this in several adjustments, where you'll set it like this, hit OK, come back in, do more adjustments, hit OK, and then do more? Or can you just really slide this down all the way and do it all in one shot? I'm not sure which works better. But now you can see, hopefully you can see this in the video, I'm starting to get some of this North America Nebula coming through there. So I'm going to go back into colors, levels again, and now you can see the histogram's a little bit more spread out. So I'm going to bring the black side here. I'm going to take the gray level and again bring it roughly halfway down. That's just what I've happened to find works kind of best. And I'll do that a few more times. You can see that one of my images had some kind of light flare on it. Maybe my head-mounted headlamp caught the edge of the telescope as I was pacing around for my 3-minute light frames. And I'm going to probably end up cropping that out in the final version. I'll do this a couple more times, and again scale this black here. Almost to the edge, not quite. Again, you don't want to clip off any of that, and then bring this gray point again kind of midway through here. So now you can start to see some of the nebulosity and the dust clouds coming through there. And I found if I overprocess it a little bit, I get some of the noise coming through. I shot this at 800 ISO for 3 minutes, and while the Canon 6D is pretty good, there will be some noise in that eventually. Also, I noticed that because this North American Nebula is kind of in the Milky Way, boy, there are a lot of stars in here. And I guess I didn't realize that some of the other objects that I've photographed have not had nearly this many stars in it. And I think that's just kind of a little bit of noisy background compared to the image. So what I'm going to do is use Gimp here to then crop that out. Now what I like to do is have a fixed aspect ratio. I set mine for 1920 by 1080, just a little bit more viewable on phones and or TVs. I'm going to crop out over here on the right side that little lens flare there, and I turn on the rule of thirds guides, because just from photography I think that tends to work better. So what I'm going to do is kind of crop this. I'll make this a little bit larger, keep the rule of thirds, keep that epsilon Cygnus star there, and then also kind of here on this intersection point, keep that the Gulf of Mexico there from the North American Nebula there, hit crop, and then I'm going to do a little bit more of the imaging with the exposure, maybe change the black level and the exposure level just a little bit in here, and not a lot, but depending on how we do this, we'll get some of that nebulosity to come out of there. And I'm going to hold down the control key on my keyboard and kind of zoom in and out of here. and so I can see how some of that. And another thing to do is to process this with curves. Now you have to be careful of this, because if you're doing the entire color set here, that's one thing. So you can see the histogram here, and I wish this was a little bit higher, and there's probably some ways to do that. But what I'm going to do is take roughly about halfway up this curve and grab this point and drag it down in there. That'll kind of set our dark point. And about halfway up here, I'm going to take this and brighten that up a little bit. And depending on how I want to do this and how much noise I want to get into this, so that really gives us a little bit of control over here. But as I was saying, you have to be a little bit careful with this, because if you're set for one of the particular colors, you can really start altering the color of the image artificially. And you know, there's already enough red in the North America Nebula. Maybe I wanted to add a little blue in there and add some purple into it or whatnot. But you can then drag this, and what I tend to do is follow slightly this same curve and bring out some of those adjustments for each one of those colors. But I try not to do this too much, because it then ends up looking artificial. So a lot of times I'll play with this and then just end up canceling that part of it, and then going back to just the overall value of everything. So again, just kind of set this a little bit like that, and bring out that nebulosity in there. So I'm going to click OK and do a few more adjustments, and then I'll show you the final image. Well, here's the final image. I'm pretty happy with it for how much time and effort I put into it, and especially learning. I'll probably frame it up the next time I try to do this a little bit better, get a little bit better processing in. Thank you for taking the time. Comment below if you have any ideas, suggestions, or just liked what you saw, and definitely subscribe and give us a like. Thank you for watching the Universal Observations channel on this North America Nebula NGC 7000. Thanks.